A canine dog ripped open the daycare floor and exposed a hidden chamber no one knew existed. Inside lay evidence from a decades-old crime that stunned the entire town. This is the story of the dog who unearthed secrets everyone thought were buried. Forever, Miss Hartley, the head teacher, sipped her coffee while chatting quietly with a pair of parents near the doorway. She'd organized today's visit weeks ago, a special presentation from the local K-9 unit to teach the children about safety and the important jobs dogs could do. When Officer Blake stepped inside in his crisp uniform, leading a large German shepherd named Jax, the room fell into an odd hush. Jax's black harness gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the word police printed in bold letters along the side. Several kids scooted closer, eyes wide with fascination. One little boy clutched a stuffed puppy to his chest, as if hoping it might impress the real thing. Officer Blake smiled warmly. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his deep voice carrying easily over the hum of the classroom. "Jax and I are here today to show you how a police dog helps keep people safe." It was meant to be an ordinary day. No one could have guessed what Jax would find. Officer Blake reached into his pocket for a rubber toy he used for demonstrations, ready to show the children how Jax could find hidden objects. But before he could give the command, the big shepherd's ears flicked sharply forward. Jax turned his head away from the toy and stared at the far corner of the play area. His nose lifted, sniffing the air with quick, purposeful breaths. "Jax," Blake called, snapping his fingers. "Focus." But the dog wasn't listening. He took 3 slow steps toward the foam puzzle mats that covered most of the floor, then began to circle, nose nearly brushing the bright green tiles that a few children giggled, thinking it was part of the show. Miss Hartley tilted her head, puzzled. She'd seen plenty of demonstrations before, but never one where the dog ignored his handler completely. Officer Blake felt a prickle of unease. He knew Jax's body language, the intense focus, the low growl building in his throat. This wasn't curiosity. It was an alert that he stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Everyone, please stay back." Little hands dropped their toys as the room fell silent. Every eye locked on the German shepherd now pacing in a tight circle over the same patch of floor. Jax's growl grew deeper, vibrating through the quiet classroom like a warning bell. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself onto his belly and began pawing at the edge of the foam mat. His claws hooked under the corner and tugged, peeling it back with a rip that made several children gasp. "Jax, leave it," Officer Blake commanded, but the dog didn't stop. He hooked his paw beneath the mat again and yanked harder, exposing the smooth wooden floor underneath. His nose pressed tight to the boards, and a muffled whine escaped his throat. Miss Hartley stepped forward, instinctively, but Officer Blake held out an arm, blocking her path. "Please," he said, voice firm, "stay back. He's alerting on something." Jax began to dig in earnest, claws scraping the wood in frantic, determined strokes. Tiny splinters flew up around his paws. The hollow thump beneath the boards was unmistakable now. Something hidden, something that didn't belong. That a little girl near the toy shelf clutched her friend's hand, her eyes huge. No one was laughing anymore. With one final scratch, Jax paused and looked up at Blake, his chest heaving. Then he placed a single paw over the faint seam in the floor and barked, short, sharp, and certain. Officer Blake felt his stomach twist. Whatever was under there, it wasn't part of any demonstration. Officer Blake crouched beside Jax and ran his hand over the seam the dog had exposed. His fingers found a thin gap between the boards, almost invisible if you didn't know where to look. He glanced up at Miss Hartley, who was pale and silent. "I need everyone to step back toward the cubbies," he said evenly. His voice left no room for argument. Teachers gathered the children, guiding them away with gentle hands. The kids moved reluctantly, craning their necks to see what was happening. Blake slipped a small tool from his belt and pried the boards apart. They creaked in protest, then lifted free, revealing a dark square of empty space beneath. A cold, stale draft rose up, carrying the smell of old earth and something metallic. Miss Hartley covered her mouth with both hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. Jax stood perfectly still at the edge of the hole, his ears flat, his tail held low. He didn't bark or move. He simply stared into the darkness as if he already understood this discovery would change everything. "Officer," Blake clicked on his flashlight and shone it down into the hidden chamber. The beam caught the edges of old wooden crates stacked in neat rows, each marked with faded black numbers. For a moment, no one spoke. The flashlight beam danced across the crates, picking out ragged labels and the dull gleam of metal hinges. Dust swirled up in the cold draft, thick enough to make Officer Blake cough that he shifted the light, illuminating a rusted lockbox wedged between two crates. Its corners were dented, and the lid was stamped with an insignia he didn't recognize. He reached down, heart hammering, and lifted it out carefully. Jack stepped back as Blake set the box on the classroom floor. Miss Hartley hovered near the doorway, her face ashen. "What is that?" she whispered. "I'm not sure," Blake admitted. He fished a small pry bar from his belt, wedged it under the lip of the lid, and forced it open. The lock gave with a brittle snap. Inside lay stacks of brittle paper bound with twine, yellowed with age. He lifted the top bundle and unrolled it slowly. Handwritten names covered the page, each followed by a date and a series of numbers that looked like bank account codes. Behind the papers, neat rows of bundled cash sat in the bottom of the box, their edges crisp despite the years underground. Blake exhaled, a chill running up his spine. "This is evidence," he said hoarsely. "These are records, maybe from that old embezzlement case. The one nobody ever solved." Jack sat down beside the crate, watching silently as if he'd been waiting for this truth to surface all along. News spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within an hour, the street outside the daycare filled with reporters and curious neighbors. Yellow tape cordoned off the entrance as more officers arrived to document the discovery. An elderly detective, gray-haired and stooped, stepped carefully inside and stared at the open lockbox. His eyes widened. "I worked this case 30 years ago," he murmured. "Everyone thought the evidence was destroyed in the old bank fire." Miss Hartley stood near the cubbies, hugging herself. "How could it have been here all this time?" She whispered that no one had an answer. Outside, cameras flashed as townspeople pieced together the scandal. Millions embezzled, names that had been whispered behind closed doors, all hidden under the floor where children played every day. In the middle of it all, Jax lay calmly by the hatch, as if he knew he'd done exactly what he was meant to do. By late afternoon, the mayor arrived to see the hidden chamber for himself. He paused to crouch beside Jax, laying a hand gently on the dog's broad shoulder. Cameras clicked as he looked up at Officer Blake. "This town owes your partner a debt," he said solemnly. "Without him, the truth might have stayed buried forever." Inside the daycare, the children peeked around the doorway, wide-eyed but no longer afraid. One little girl slipped past the adults and crouched beside Jax. She placed a tiny hand on his head. "Good dog," she whispered, her voice soft but certain. The crowd seemed to exhale all at once, the tension melting away into a warm hush. Blake felt a swell of pride so strong it made his throat ache. In that moment, it didn't matter how long the secrets had been hidden. What mattered was that a dog with an unshakable nose had finally set them free. As the sun sank behind the daycare roof, Officer Blake clipped Jax's leash back onto his harness. The dog stood calmly, his tail giving one slow, contented wag. Blake took a last look at the open floorboards, the hidden chamber now bright with floodlights. So many years, so many questions, finally answered by a single, determined animal. He leaned down and scratched behind Jax's ears. "You did good, partner," he murmured. And as they walked away together, it was clear to everyone watching that sometimes the truth waits patiently underground until the right nose comes along to uncover it.